People who say, just following up.
There's a phrase people use that sounds polite, professional, and completely harmless. Just following up. It usually arrives quietly, no urgency, no pressure. On the surface, it feels respectful, like someone simply checking in, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. And because of that, no one reacts strongly to it. It doesn't sound demanding. It doesn't sound annoyed. It sounds reasonable. But the moment you read it, something shifts. Because just following up isn't really about information. It's about reminding, about nudging, about reopening a conversation that was already left hanging. And once you notice that, the phrase starts to feel very familiar.
Usually, just following up appears after silence. A message was sent, time passed, nothing happened. So the follow-up arrives, carefully worded, polite, softened by the word just. There's no accusation, no demand. It feels like the safest possible way to restart the conversation. And because it sounds gentle, it often works. The conversation reopens, a reply comes in, things move forward, at least for the moment. Because the phrase isn't meant to solve anything, it's meant to keep things moving without friction. And that's exactly why it gets used so often.
The issue isn't sending one follow-up. It's when just following up becomes part of the routine. Messages go unanswered, days pass, and the phrase returns, again and again. Not to clarify anything, not to change the situation, just to keep the conversation alive. Over time, the phrase stops feeling polite and starts feeling expected. Because the follow-up isn't optional anymore. It's required. And that quietly changes the dynamic. For the person receiving it, just following up creates tension. Not because it's aggressive, but because it highlights the silence. You suddenly become aware of the delay, of the missed response, of the expectation that was left unanswered. The phrase doesn't accuse, but it doesn't forget either. It gently brings the gap back into focus. And that can feel uncomfortable. Not enough to confront, but enough to linger. Most people don't say just following up to apply pressure. They say it because it feels neutral. It avoids sounding demanding, it avoids sounding annoyed, and it avoids direct confrontation. The phrase softens responsibility on both sides. It allows one person to ask without asking, and allows the other to respond without explaining. In professional and personal spaces alike, that balance feels convenient, even when it creates quiet frustration.
At some point, you start recognizing the phrase immediately. You see, just following up, and you already know what it means. Sometimes you're the one sending it, trying to sound polite instead of impatient. Other times you're the one receiving it, realizing the message stayed unanswered for too long. Either way, the phrase feels familiar. Not because it's wrong, but because it quietly shifts responsibility without ever saying so out loud. And once you notice that pattern, it's hard not to see it everywhere.
Just following up isn't a bad phrase. It sounds polite, professional, carefully chosen. But it's another example of how modern communication avoids directness, words that reopen conversations without addressing why they stopped in the first place. And somehow, without discussion, this became completely normal. So the question remains, who approved this?